Welcome to Pitch It To Me podcast, a show about the subjective past, present, and potential future of flesh and blood design, hosted by, you guessed it, 3 dudes. But don't worry, we're not all white and we're not all straight. Today's episode will be all about limited in flesh and blood. On red pitch, Clark will discuss how a limited set is designed. On yellow pitch, Joel will give some general strategy tips, and on blue pitch, Fuzzy will talk about custom draft formats created by players. You can find us across all socials such as TikTok and Instagram at Pitch It To Me Podcast.
Hey gamers, thanks so much for joining us for this episode.
Today, we're going to be introducing sort of what we see as our last staple of the podcast, talking about limited formats. So this is going to be our limited opinion series.
Yeah, we really wanted to start this podcast from our conversations after having some kitchen table drafts.
I mean, it's fun with you guys. I'll say that much.
Yeah. I mean, limited is a really big part of the game, especially the competitive scene. Pre-releases, skirmishes, Road to Nationals, Pro Quests, and Worlds all have limited formats. So we'll probably be talking about limited formats on the podcast often.
This will be our broad look at limited, and we'll probably go into more detail about specific formats. We'll dive deep, if you will, at later dates.
Yeah. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into red pitch, where we talk about design.
Take it away, Clark.
Yeah, so first off, let's talk about what is limited for any of the uninitiated. So limited is a way of describing a couple different formats. It's kind of a category of formats when set against constructed. So constructed would be things like Blitz and Classic Constructed, while limited is like draft and sealed. For limited events, you make your deck for the event. Constructing the deck is a part of playing the format, is the way that I like to think about it. And then another thing I really want to note is that limited is typically weaker in power than constructed. I think that is by definition something that limited is very inherent to limited.
That makes sense. With constructed, you're trying to pick just the best cards to go into your deck, whereas in a limited format, you're just working with what's given to you. And it's also an opportunity to play with some lower power cards. There are cards that I would never be happy to play in a constructed deck, but I get the opportunity to play them in limited. And they're a part of the game that LSS designed, and limited is the chance for them to shine.
Yeah, like yellow cards.
Yeah.
Yeah. Normally you very rarely play yellow cards unless they're a mythic or something.
Right.
But now you need to run yellows just to make sure you have enough cards in your deck. Another thing about limited is packs. A lot of the time constructing your deck is done with packs, is sealed packs from what would you say, from Legend Story Studios.
Okay.
Or sometimes with Cube, you are constructing packs.
Mm-hmm. And if you've never heard about Cube before, we'll talk about it a bit later today.
So what makes Flesh and Blood Limited different from other limited formats, different from, say, Magic the Gathering? The first thing that I really think of is the lack of a curve. We talked about this in our episode, sort of talking about what makes Flesh and Blood just generally different from other card games. But Flesh and Blood doesn't have a curve. Instead, it sort of has this ratio between how many cards are you pitching and blocking with, how many cards are you playing, and how that changes throughout a turn. So really what you're trying to do whenever you construct a deck during these limited formats is that you're really trying to have as much power as possible, and then making sure that you have enough pitch in your hand to play that power. Whether that also includes things like your weapon or your equipment, any abilities on your equipment, it's kind of another thing entirely. But a lot of the time, whenever I'm going into a limited format or I end up selecting my hero during the game time, I really think about what is my ideal hand.
Yeah, definitely. And every hero's going to want a slightly different thing, right? If I'm playing Guardian, like Oldhim or Bravo in draft, they like them blues. They like to have lots of resources because they've got expensive cards. They're heavy hitters. They cost a lot of resources. So you need a lot of blues in your draft. If you're not drafting enough blues, you ain't going to be able to play their power cards.
Yeah, that's in contrast with Brute, where the most popular archetype for Brute is like Yellow Bellow, which is just grabbing any card that's yellow and or has the word Bellow in it, because it pitches so well into your attacks and to your weapon very easily.
Yeah.
But you need those reds. Everyone needs the reds.
Reds are pretty cool, I'm not gonna lie.
Another thing that you really got to think about with Flesh and Blood Limited is how many reds, how many yellows, how many blues. Really trying to balance that blend of resources and power. Blues are always going to be weaker. Reds are always going to be stronger. But if you don't have enough blues, you're not going to be able to play your entire hand. And it gets very, very difficult to play the game. I remember the first draft I did, I didn't take enough blue. I didn't take any blues until pack 3. And then I grabbed every single blue that I could possibly run for my deck. And I ended up with like 6.
Jeez.
And it was really rough. Ever since then, the draft advice I give to new players is don't forget to pick up blues.
It's funny, at this point, I have a little bit of a counterexample story. I was at a RTN this weekend, and I thought I had the most kick-butt Ranger deck because people kept passing me arrows. I was able to run 20 arrows in a limited deck, which I usually think is pretty good. You know, I'm playing Azalea. I could like blind Azalea off the top, and I have like an above average chance of finding an arrow. That's pretty sweet. I'm pretty happy. But I realized that like, while I was getting a lot of arrows, I only had like 3 or 4 red arrows.
Oh, wow.
So I actually didn't have a good Ranger deck as much as I thought I did. I had a very mediocre Ranger deck that was able to blind Azalea off the top to find like a blue. A blue with Dominate isn't really that good. And the player to my right happened to also be playing Ranger, which I was very surprised. I was getting past a lot of Ranger stuff, but he was taking all of the good Ranger stuff, and I wasn't getting left with any red arrows. I think the red arrows I had were from pack 2, right? So just something to keep in mind, that those red cards, you do kind of need them for a good deck. You can have days where you're like, I needed more blues. You can also very much have days where you're like, I needed more power. I needed more reds.
Yeah, I feel like we're talking maybe a little bit too much about strategy. To get back on the idea of like design, there is a lack of obvious power cards in Flesh and Blood as well. And so a lot of the times your mythic or your rare cards aren't going to be the actual cards that are strongest. Consider, for in fact, from this most recent set of Outsiders, Bleed Out versus Infecting Shot. Infecting Shot is the much stronger card, but Bleed Out has that higher rarity point. So unlike Magic the Gathering, where typically the higher it is in terms of rarity, the more powerful it's going to be, that isn't always the case.
And I would still say there is that pattern. Rares, on average, are stronger than your average common, but definitely not a rule. There are plenty of commons that are just important cards that you kind of need to have in your deck to make it work. There are plenty of rares that are whatever, and you can kind of ignore them. But it's not a bad idea to think, this rare is probably better than this common.
And finally, one of the most important things that sort of sets Flesh and Blood drafts apart, and I would say sealed too, is that a lot of the times you are constructing these decks out of packs, which means you're going to see a set amount of cards. For draft, you'll see 42 or 45 cards based on whether you have a 14 or 15 card pack, depends on the set. And you're going to need 30 cards that you can play in a deck. For Magic, you're going to see the same amount of cards, 42, or no, because it's 15 card packs for Magic. So you definitely see 45. But you only need 23 playables to construct a deck. And so there's a lot more card selection that kind of happens after the fact. Well, for Flesh and Blood, your card selection is happening while you're drafting.
It's a very tight draft, too. You can't afford to decide halfway through pack 2, like what hero you're going to be running. You need to decide pretty early in the draft.
Yeah, you draw some random bomb in pack 3, you can't change your entire game plan. This makes those cards that can work for multiple heroes more important. They have a higher priority in the draft. They are more important in your sealed pool. They're just going to matter more because they let you be more flexible. They can exist in multiple different decks that you might construct based on what you end up seeing. And so I really think the strength of a set and how good it feels to play is going to be based on how well do the generics feel? How well do the generics fit with the different heroes? Do they have enough cards that work for multiple different heroes? Because if they don't, then it can very much feel like, all right, pick your hero early and stay there, or else you're not going to end up with what you need.
And that kind of makes a set like Arcane Rising feel very different than a set like Outsiders. Arcane Rising has 4 heroes and a bunch of generics. There's no shared talents. There's no hybrid cards. Each hero is very siloed. They have the overlap in generics, but that's it. So you kind of need to decide early on, you need to start picking up those class cards, because the generics, once they're out, you can't really afford to pick a bunch of different class cards from a bunch of different classes.
Yeah. Now, if you are new to limited formats, don't be too concerned. There is a token that Legend Story Studios has put into everything so that you can fill out your deck, Cracked Baubles. It's a yellow pitch item. No, it's not even an item, is it?
It's a resource
It's a
gem.
generic resource.
Yeah, it's a generic resource gem. All you can do is pitch it. It's a yellow pitch, and you can put any amount of those in your deck, but they're definitely weak cards. They can't block. They can't be played. They are only for pitch. It's 2 pitch, which is less than ideal. You don't want them in your deck.
Are they always yellow?
Yeah,
The crack bubbles are always yellow.
I did not notice that. Maybe I'm so good at drafting. I don't know, but
sure.
Yeah.
because I did not realize that until right
I mean,
now.
that's where you want to get. You want to get to the point where you don't have crack bubbles in your deck. A couple other things I kind of want to mention when it comes to the design of Flesh and Blood drafts. Heroes can play differently in limited versus constructed. Joel mentioned Yellow Bellow for Brute, which is very different than how Brute plays in constructed. Yeah, it's important to think about those sorts of things, primarily because you're not going to have the most ideal power cards. You're not going to have the most ideal ratio between what resources you have and what cards you can play with. Because you can't really construct your deck, it's going to be a lot more on the fly. A lot of the times I found myself with like mana floating or wanting that yellow in my deck to be a blue. Or, oh man, I wish this yellow card I'm playing was actually a red. That's going to happen a lot during limited.
Yeah, you find yourself just working with what you've got. For that reason, limited decks often don't necessarily get given a tag like aggro or control. It's just limited, right?
Yeah.
You're just working with what you have. Limited decks kind of feel a little bit more generic, if you will, strategy-wise.
Oh yeah, we're talking about heroes playing differently. Katsu with combo. You can't really run super efficient combo lines in Katsu. Instead, it's more like, oh hey, I got combo to go off.
Or like Kano is still going to play attack actions because he has to, right? But in constructed, it's just those wizard spells. It's a very highly tuned machine.
Yeah, so they're going to feel a little bit different playing them in limited versus playing in constructed, and you should be aware of that going into your limited formats so that you can expect that to be the case.
But if you feel inspired after playing limited to learn a hero more, maybe you really liked Icelander in Uprising Draft, and you're like, I'm going to build an Icelander deck now. Like, that's great. Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
Well, yes, because we don't want more Icelander players, first and foremost.
Well, maybe we do. Get her to Living Legend
Nope.
out quicker.
Nope. She's fine where she's at.
Next is Sealed versus Draft. Sealed and Draft are 2 different formats. With Sealed, you have 6 packs, and you open them and construct your deck from those packs. With Draft, you have 3 packs. You take 1 out of your pack and then pass it along so that other players get to see those same cards. This does create some differences. Mostly, I think that in Sealed, you care a little bit more about your card pool over any specific power pieces. I don't think you're really, like in Magic, the way that Sealed goes is that you look for your bombs. You look for those cards that are going to win you the game because they're going to sit there and keep giving you value, whether they're being put on the board or whether they're one big giant thing that gives you a bunch of value. Either way, you build your deck around your bombs, and you can run a lot of, playable chaff, and that's totally fine. But with Sealed in Flesh and Blood, I think it matters a little bit more that you have a nice, strong card pool.
Yeah, it's nice when you get, like, for instance, in Outsiders Draft, if you see Shakedown for Azuri, you're like, yes, I'm playing Azuri. And you're like, wait a minute, I have 3 stealth cards. Maybe this is an L. And you just pick, like, the next best thing.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I kind of take a little bit of the opposite approach. I guess you're talking about like those 2 or 3 power cards that you build your deck around in Magic.
Yeah.
In Flesh and Blood, I do try to look for, in my seal pool, which of these classes has the most reds, because I want to be playing cards that have impact If I like pulled lots and lots of this class, but they're all like yellow and blue, I'm not going to be as excited to play that class. But there is definitely a good philosophy where like the more options I have for that class, surely will have the best options available. Like I'll be able to make more choices in my deck building. Having a larger card pool through those packs will probably get me a better deck. So that's certainly a good strategy.
And then finally, it feels like this has been talking a little bit about strategy, but this next section is definitely about designing drafts, the shape of the draft, and how do we conceptualize the draft.
This is so fascinating to me.
Yeah, so Fuzzy, you talked about Arcane Rising, 4 unique, distinct heroes with no overlap except for generics, sort of like 4 individual pillars.
And I always like to visualize like the shape would be an X, right? Like they meet in the middle, they all branch off in different directions.
To talk about a couple of shapes, Tales of Aria is probably one of the best draft formats that at least we've experienced playing at our kitchen table.
I really like the shape of it. Stepping away from balance for a second, I like the design and patterns included in the set a lot. That you have these elements that are shared. You can start drafting an element before you decide what hero you're drafting, or you could start looking at a hero without deciding which of the elements you're tapping more into. You can see what's available in different ways. You can do like a half commitment before a full commitment, and that's something that makes Tales of Aria pretty unique.
And that's compared to Uprising Draft, where you're either jamming Fi, or you either get a bunch of dragons like, okay, I'll play Dromite, I guess, or you have the like nuts pool of Icelander, so you play that. But most of the time, Fi is just so powerful in draft, you're just going to try and focus him usually.
But it's definitely important. I think another thing that really helped Tales of Aria was the elemental hero type on all 3 of them as well, because it expanded the generic card pool. Yes, you had the generics, but you also had the elemental cards. There weren't many cards that just said elemental on them, but it still helped bolster that flexibility. And that flexibility made the whole thing a lot more comfortable. Also, shout out to Outsiders with the hybrid cards.
Oh yeah.
Helped dramatically with that feeling of a greater shared card pool that really allowed a more flexibility. Because those sort of act as the glue. Those hybrid cards, those elemental cards, the generics, they are the glue that makes the draft work. They are the things that present a solid concept for what is the draft.
Yeah, that's what makes it interesting by far. Being able to take cards without knowing what hero you're in, being able to see the cards past you and make a decision of this is what's open, this would be the best thing for me to play. Because if too many people, you don't want to be the guy fighting for all the same hero. You would rather be the guy who's the only person playing that hero. And you have to read the draft to figure that out.
Yeah. And I do want to say Arcane Rising actually did do something really interesting with their generics, which was the top of the deck. Lots of the heroes there cared about the top of the deck, and so a lot of the generics cared about the top of the deck. That's where we saw Ravenous Rabble. And so that still gave the draft and the set a strong identity outside of what those 4 heroes were, because all 4 heroes sort of played with this idea of caring about what's on top of the deck.
I love that idea of generics that aren't true generics. Like in Outsiders, you have Ravenous Rabble, again, was reprinted in Outsiders, which is great in Azalea. It's great if you just want to go wide, like maybe in a ninja deck. It's great if you're planning on playing more reds. Not every hero in that set wants to run Ravenous Rabble, though. Scout the Periphery is probably even a better example.
Caring about Arsenal, because Riptide cares about Arsenal. Assassins care about Arsenal.
And Azalea loves caring about the top card of your deck.
Yeah.
But even though it's a generic, not every hero is going to want to play it.
I mean, there are definitely some generics that are specifically geared towards certain heroes in that set, and that's why we saw Ravenous Rabble and Seek Horizon specifically for Azalea. It's got the Peripheries, a pretty amazing one if you can, sneak stuff into your arsenal via Riptide or loading with a bow or whatever. So I do like that design as well, where anyone can use the generics, but it's like if you get rewarded if you start jamming a hero early and you find those generics that maybe not everyone just is quite equipped to yet. Maybe they find some other cards they want, so you get to take that buff for yourself if you see it.
Yeah, like those generics could carry signals, right? You're not just looking at how many class cards are here, but you see that Scout the Periphery, 4 cards have already been taken out of this pack and Scout the Periphery is still there, maybe that means that nobody's planning on playing Azalea yet. So I can take that with the intention of jamming Azalea.
I like that example because I'm the exact opposite, where I see Scout the Periphery. I'm like, dang, what bomb did they get and left this juicy card here? I'm screwed.
So we have talked a lot about strategy. Why don't we get deeper into the strategy of what are we looking to do during these sealed, during these drafts, Joel?
Yeah, so moving on to Yellow Pitch, going into the strategy of Flesh and Blood draft. I was thinking about highlighting the competitiveness of Flesh and Blood draft and why it's important, some tips and tricks. Some things you can use to your advantage is paying attention to signals while you're drafting. We've already touched on it briefly, where if you see a specific card like Scout the Periphery in Outsider's draft, where it's very clearly a raging card, where you can look at the top of your deck to see if you want to use Azalea's ability for it or just buff the next arrow out of your arsenal. And if you see that card, you can kind of use that to your advantage and see who to your left or right is taking what cards from those packs.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Joel. Just to rephrase it, you could say that a signal in a draft is a card that you would expect to get picked really early on in the draft, but it hasn't, right? It's a card that is stronger than you would expect to see at that point in the draft. That's how you kind of know that, like, okay, if people were playing this hero, they would have taken this card. The fact that they haven't implies that they are not playing that hero. So maybe I should, because again, I want to be that hero. I want to be the guy who's going for the hero that other people are not.
Yeah, I do a very particular thing when I draft, and this was easiest to do in Tales of Aria, is that I would be looking at, it's always in the second pack I find myself doing it. It's in the second pack, a couple of cards in. What I do is that I take the best card for my archetype out of it, and then I find the next 2 best cards. And I say, okay, when is the next time I'm going to see this pack? And then I count how many people there are at the draft, and I count how many cards there should be in this pack. Usually it's like 4. It's like 4.
Yeah.
So 4 or 5 is around about the time. So then I get that pack that is now 4 cards or 5 cards, and I look, did one of those 2 make it through? If they didn't, then there are 2 other people in my archetype. And I know, okay, I might be the third person. Maybe I need to pivot. And that can feel weird towards the end of pack 2.
Clark, that is so freaking pro. That's like exactly how you're supposed to do it. I just can't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say the same thing. Like, I cannot bring myself to do that. I know I should to do better in these drafts.
Yeah, to like actually pay attention and see what wheels. Like, I can tell when I'm at the pick, I'm like, oh, I recognize these cards. This is my wheel pick. And sometimes I'll be like, oh, actually, this made its way all the way back to me. That's crazy. But I can't like think of it in like ahead of time. I can't be like, oh, I'm gonna track these 2 cards, and then when it comes back around, I'll notice if those 2 cards are still there, and if they're not. But that's exactly how you're supposed to do it, right?
Yeah.
You like say that gives me a lot of information. I know that there are 2 other people in that archetype, so maybe I should like steer away from it or whatever.
You took the words right out of my mouth. That's exactly what I think too. Like, I know I should be paying attention to this. I think the only way that I would really be able to understand, like if it's super glaring, like if I'm seeing like Surging Strike red in pack 2, I'm like, okay, Ninja's for sure open, but I'm like, how boned would I be if I try to go for Ninja now, you know?
Yeah, because you only have 2 packs. That's literally less than 30 cards you have available, right?
Yep.
You have to have picked generics in pack 1 to do a pivot like that. As far as signals, one other thing I want to mention is frequency of cards. Like, I drafted Ranger the other day because I saw, like, I literally got past 4 cards in one of these packs, and it was 4 Ranger cards. And I'm like, yep, I'm in the right class. Because if there's only Ranger cards left in the pack, that means Ranger has to be open, right? Or similarly, like, you get past 10 cards, and, like, the most common class card in there is this one class. That one is probably open. That's what I'm looking at most in a draft. That's not necessarily the most sophisticated thing. After all, you should be asking yourself, well, are they good cards? Did they get are they getting passed because they're not in Ranger? Are they getting passed because they're not good Ranger cards? And I think I'm still trying to train myself to get to the point where I can identify that. But frequency of cards is one signal that you can read in your draft.
For sure. And that bleeds beautifully into our next point. It's like, how long do you stay open on a class? Because if you're seeing like 3 or 4 Ranger cards in one pack, you're like, okay, did they take the best Ranger card? Did they take ninja cards or assassin cards specifically for Outsiders Draft, or are they just taking generics to stay open? Because, and especially with Outsiders Draft, with the hybrid cards too, you may see like a really good ranger card or a really good assassin card, and then you see like a decent hybrid card. So you may want to take the hybrid card just to like feel out who is passing you stuff as you go along, and that can be a really good indicator of what you see at the rest of the table, especially in pack 2. Once you start passing to the other direction, you're like, okay, I'm seeing a lot more ninja cards. That means there's definitely a ninja to my right, or vice versa, however it fleshes out.
Yeah, staying open is such an interesting idea. I think I stay open in a very different way than other people stay open, which is that I just pick 2 of the archetypes to sit in. And so I will always take the power cards for those 2 archetypes in the first pack.
Yeah, so you like kind of half commit to 2 different classes, maybe?
Yes.
2 different heroes?
And of course, if there's always like a really good generic, like a Red Scout the Periphery or something like that, sure, I may prioritize that over. But I typically, or like a nice blue generic, a nice good blue generic.
Yeah.
Blue come to fight.
Oh yeah, those like blue block 3s generic.
Oh, yeah.
Like that's golden.
Yeah, but I still typically try to pick 2 of the power cards that I stick in. Well, I think that's also because I just love playing with synergy in mind rather than just good stuff.
As much as you can get in limited, at least, right?
Yeah, as much as I can get in limited.
Right.
But I do typically find that my limited decks have higher levels of synergies than other people because I do that instead. Because I early pick from 2 different archetypes, and then by the end of the pack, I have made a decision based on some of those signals that I've seen.
Sure. And that's a good point to bring up too, is like, is it a power card or is it a trap? Like if you see, for instance, in Welcome to Wraith Draft, if you see like a Blood Rush Bellow and you like, oh, I love playing this in my CC deck, I'm going to grab it. And then you never see blues, or you're drafting a bunch of yellows and reds, you don't see like a bunch of pack hunts, or you see like a bunch of non-attacks, then Blood Rush Bellow gets so worse and it becomes like a trap.
Yeah, you need to run a lot of 6s, like 6-cost attacks to make that work,
Yeah,
that
and
you don't necessarily get in limited.
Exactly. You might have a bunch of like yellow pack hunts, blue. I mean, Wrecker Romp is exactly what you need at blue, but you know, these just non-6s resource cards.
Some legendaries are like this. Rock. Or is Rock a mythic?
It's not in a draftable set,
It's not in a draftable
but that would be a
set, but-
trap. If you ever saw Rock,
Yep.
like the weapon that
Yeah.
you have to have an empty hand to play.
That's something you don't grab. Yep.
Yeah, things that just require too much construction to end
Yeah.
up playing.
Yeah. So I think paying attention to what is actually realistic based on what you have drafted so far, and then especially like if you're in pack 2 and you see like something not in your archetype, like you're for sure passing it because you want to have more consistency pieces for the rest of your deck. Otherwise, you're going to really run yourself the risk of not having that perfect 30 or 30 minimum to run like an actual deck. Another constraint you want to keep a track of that's different from Magic the Gathering, you know, you have lands that you're just going to add in, so you're always going to have access to those resources. But one resource you want to draft alongside the rest of your cards is equipment. I personally feel that I messed up one of my RTN drafts because I had one headpiece. It was like Seeker's Hood or something like that.
Oh my goodness. I was in the same situation. I was like, I don't think I have 30 cards. I need cards. I can't afford to take an equipment. I need cards that go in my deck. Like I stayed open for too long. It's like trying to pivot between 2 classes. Like I needed deck cards. I couldn't afford a non-deck card, you know? Those equipment are hard. Like you only have so many picks.
And the amount of people that were drafting like 4 and 5, I'm like, how do you do it? I just didn't even see that many, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
It's the priority. You got to put high priority on equipment.
They're amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, because I remember literally seeing 2 possibilities for me to draft him, and I was like, I'll see more, and I did not. I saw one that I picked, and then the rest were just I just never saw him again.
Yeah,
A
but
lot
if
of the times they feel like boring cards to grab. You want to grab a nice red arrow. Oh yeah, red arrows are spicy. They're sexy. They feel good to play. But no, take that iron rot boots. Take
Iron
the
Rot's
iron rot
great.
boots because it's going to be better.
yeah, Outsiders is a little weird because it's all the Seekers equipment.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
You're like, is Seekers equipment good? Whatever. In a different format like Monarch coming up, like things like Ebb and Fold, a lot of the Monarch common equipments are so clutch.
Yeah.
They can like really make or break your draft. So I've
sure.
heard.
So why does any of this matter? Like, will you actually be playing competitive Flesh and Blood? The answer is yes. I was very surprised at how many events that I actually had to play draft and was super bummed about because I'm not good at draft. But a lot of the ProQuest skirmishes and Road to Nats, like the tier 2 events leading up to these larger events, will have draft events because it's up to, I believe for Road to Nats, it was the store's choice to do either CC or draft. And I guess it just depends on their player base. They would know it better. But in case your locals has draft, you want to be prepared for that kind of stuff. Because also at Worlds, the entire day was just full of CC, Blitz, and draft. You like to be proficient in every single one to make it to the end. So if you care about progressing as a player, you need to be really well-rounded. Especially if you find yourself qualifying for Worlds somehow because you work so hard. And then I have to also grind these 2 other events, Blitz and Draft, because I've been focusing so much on CC, which, that's good. CC is usually what's going to get you the most points, but being well-rounded is super important as you progress as a player.
And don't you want to show off at your pre-release? Don't you want to be the hot guy in town who's able to 4-0 his pre-release? Don't you want to show off to everyone your skills?
That's true.
Yes. Yes, I do, Fuzzy. I want to be the person going 4-0 every single draft. And someone is afraid when I sit down at their table.
True. Like, oh my God, this guy pulled a legendary. No way.
Such skill.
Such skill. Wow. But yeah, so, back to again, if you're living in the middle of nowhere and not in SoCal where you have 6 RTNs throughout the season, if you have one as CC and the others a draft, you're boned if you've never played draft in your life. So you have to do a lot of legwork to be proficient enough. And hopefully the other people around you suck at draft too, so you maybe come out on top and get that sweet top 8. But again, you never know until it gets announced a couple of months away, and that may or may not be enough to practice. I certainly did not feel prepared for this RTN season, at least for the one draft that I did. I felt like I could have definitely practiced more and gotten more out of that experience, but yeah.
Fuzzy, you're pretty cued in on online situations and online play. Are there any online resources for draft practice?
Absolutely. If you go to talishar.com, which most players are familiar with, there's a tab to go to a website called DraftFab, and it's really fun. Pretty low stakes because it's online. You don't have to pay anything. You don't get to keep the cards after. But it's fun to draft outsiders online with real people.
Yeah, I don't know if I could do that. I like going to sealed and pre-release events because I am such a greedy drafter. I will, this past RTN, I was really good the first time, but after I did terrible, even though I had what I thought to be a really good Azalea deck, in the second draft, I was like, I'm taking this Vambrance. I need to pay for my entry, and I just like shiny cards. So most of the time, I'm going to pre-releases or sealed just to do well enough to get more cards, pretty much.
At the RTN the other day, somehow a foil majestic quiver of rustling leaves made its way around the entire table. No one picked it.
Those people were try-harding so
I was one of them. I got sucked up in the try-hard. I should have taken that quiver. The second pod, because it was a double draft.
Hold on. How'd you do on that first pod?
I somehow went 2-1. I wasn't expecting it.
You know what? No, you made the right choice, Fuzzy.
Second pod, a legendary quiver got passed to me, pick 4, and I was like, I'm taking the legendary. I don't give a crap.
How'd you do on that pod?
1-2.
And that's why.
That one card matters.
At least that card was more in my deck list because I was in Ranger, so I took the legendary quiver, and I actually didn't play it in any of my matchups, but I retrospectively decided I should have ran it in one of my matchups because I got fatigued once, and that legendary quiver stops you from getting fatigued. So I should have taken it. I also should have used it. That was my lesson.
Money drafting is a choice that every single casual player will have to face in their life. They will be staring at a legendary that is not their archetype, and they will have to go,
do I want to win? Yeah. Or do I want $20?
And sometimes winning gets you $20.
That's true.
That's true. But it's a gamble you take. And I remember hearing about this story about this this person who top 8'd, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, at a skirmish event where he passed, I think, a rainbow foil trench, and he ended up winning that event and pulled the nuts in his prizing. So you take a gamble by passing it, and you can get rewarded pretty heavily.
Anecdotal evidence.
Yep.
This is all anecdotal evidence. We don't have the stats.
Yeah, not only that, but drafting and sealed and all these pre-releases and stuff is a really good way to build your collection too. Like, especially if I feel like both of you are really good limited players, and that's kind of your background as a whole.
We like to think so, for sure, right, Clark?
Oh, yeah. I think I'm very good at limited.
Yeah, and if you're coming to a new game and you don't want to invest in these like constructed decks, you could just go to like some of these like draft events or pre-releases and start building your collection that way. And that way, if you pull like these insane majestics or legendaries, those are just yours to keep, and you paid like a fraction of the price.
Go to a draft. Just pick all the rares.
Yep.
Just take all the rares.
Just take all of them.
People are going to pass you lots of rares because they're not necessarily that good in draft. They're not important in draft. Just take all the rares.
And if you're new to the game, you're going to be going 0-3 anyway. You're not good at Flesh and Blood.
That's true.
If you're going to be losing, you don't need to make good decisions.
Get
to
your
draft
back, sis. Just focus on your money.
Or focus on sealed where you don't have to make that decision. You just get 6 packs.
Yeah.
You just buy 6 packs before you're supposed to. That's all.
I'm so happy that you brought this up, and I don't know why I didn't mention it in my section, because it's one of the things I think really matters when like Legend Story Studios designs one of their sets, is that they really got to think, okay, the people who are drafting and doing sealed and doing pre-release for this, our packs, the packs that they get during this, the decks that they build during these events are what's going to be the basis for their collection. And that's why I think it's a really great way of bringing in new players. And I always want to bring in new players through limited formats. 1, because it's a little less power. 2, because it's a little less complicated because it's less power. And 3, they get to build that collection. They get a lot of those playables that they need.
Yeah, if they have a good time, well, there you go. You get to take the cards home. For
sure. And it really helps that, with the design of Flesh and Blood is so that all of your, like, probably 80% of your deck is commons and rares anyways. So that's, a lot of the legwork you don't have to do now.
Also for new players, you show up with nothing. You don't need to bring anything.
Right.
If you're playing a constructed format, you need to have the deck done ahead of time. That means you need to do research ahead of time, buy singles ahead of time, organize with friends ahead of time. With limited, it's literally just, is the event happening? Show up with money.
Yeah, that's funny.
Uncle Fuzzy will even let you borrow a mat and some sleeves.
Yeah.
That's true. Uncle Fuzzy also, I think, has one of the coolest cubes I've seen in a while. Can you tell us more about that, Fez?
Yeah, for Blue Pitch today, I wanted to talk all about Cube. Cube is my favorite thing ever. This goes back to, again, like Magic the Gathering, where I was drafting all the time. Let me define a cube.
Okay.
Name, stupid. I don't know where it comes from. Why do they call it a cube? I don't know. What it is a custom draft set that you put together with cards from your own collection. People draft with packs made from that collection of cards. And once you're done, all the cards go back into the cube at the end of the day. So instead of drafting cards that you take home, things go back into the cube, and it's a little bit more consistent. Often, if you imagine each player has 3 packs of 15 and an 8-player draft, if you do the math, that's going to be 360 cards. So usually a cube will have 360 cards. Just enough for everyone to draft. Every card in the cube is going to get seen. Now, one nice thing about Cube is you can do whatever you want. If you want your cube to have more than 360 cards, so it's not the exact same card pool every time, you can do that. If you want your cube to have fewer than 360 cards and they're drafting packs of 12 instead of 15, if you have a reason for that, absolutely, go for it. If you want to have cubes designed for, like I had in Magic the Gathering, a 2-headed giant cube because I wanted players to play in teams of 2, and that was the draft. So much fun.
That actually sounds kind of cool.
It was, and I still have it if you want to play it.
Oh, I've said too much.
So because it's a format made by players, there's a lot more opportunity to do weird things that LSS simply can't do because they're trying to design sets for multiple reasons. Their limited sets aren't just limited sets. They're also like the game, right? In Outsiders, they're trying to do more than just make a good limited format. They wanted to print support for Assassin, Ranger, and Ninja, right? Another thing I like about Cube is that it's a way for you to use your chaff. It gives me a reason to hoard my cards like a goblin. All the cards that I get from Limited, I don't need to just toss them away. I actually have kind of a use for them, is that they could make their way into a cube someday. Even if it's like unplayable garbage, it might shine in a cube, you know?
That's true.
You can make it shine in a cube.
Exactly. You can build your cube around those cool commons that you kind of like but never got a chance to shine. You could create custom cards to go in a cube if you want. It's your cube. You could create things to go in that cube. What would you like to see in limited, right? You can do whatever you want.
I wanted to mention that what's great about also creating your own cube is that you get to take different cards from different eras of the game and put them together.
Oh, yeah.
So it's really cool to be like, look, this hero got printed way, way later. Or this archetype got printed way, way later. But I would love to see how it plays with this hero from earlier in the game.
Yeah.
On a much lower power level, because, you know, as a game gets older, you're printing better cards, attract more people, get more support. So maybe on a lower format or a lower power format, they interact with each other very differently, and it's fun to see that as well.
Yeah. Or Living Legends.
Yeah, interesting.
Or if you think that maybe a hero was too powerful in constructed, now they Living Legend out, you can bring them back, throw them in a cube, just take out all their power cards. They don't need those power cards.
Yeah, you can control which heroes are strong in your cube by looking at what they have access to.
We can make Levia good again.
Absolutely.
Good for the first time.
Good again.
You're basically making your own format, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of room for creativity. Do you want a format where 80% of the cards in every pack is blue or 80% of them are yellow to see what that would look like?
That'd be so interesting. Just the blue draft as nothing but Guardians and Wizards.
There's a lot of potential, and I want to talk about a couple examples that have existed already. And I'm also going to mention why I only have a couple examples, because Flesh and Blood Cube does have some problems, but let's look at some really good ones. Basically, there's only 2 cubes that I know about. They're both developed by the same YouTube channel / podcast. They're called OK and Y. They're awesome. If you want to go check out their YouTube channel or their podcast, they're great. They made 2 cubes. The first one is the Midwinter Cube. It's featuring Azalea, Lexi, Kano, and Icelander. So that's 2 Rangers, 2 Wizards, and 2 Ice Heroes. It has kind of a U-shaped draft. Every hero has a talent or class in common with another, and 2 of those heroes have both, right? A talent and a class in common. And they all have access to generics. Wizard cards in that cube are a little bit more geared towards Kano in order to give him a little bit more balance, since he doesn't have access to the Ice Wizard like Icelander does. The Ranger cards are more geared toward Azalea in order to give Azalea a little bit more love, since Lexi can take the Ice cards or the Elemental Ranger cards or all the Ranger cards that Azalea had access to. So Icelander and Lexi have a little bit larger card pool in the draft, but the Ranger and Wizard cards are more geared towards those like talentless heroes. It's a really cool draft. It makes use of some cool things that Cube is able to do, like have 2 Rangers in the same set. Like this was before Outsiders that the Midwinter Cube was first developed. So we hadn't really seen limited formats with multiple Rangers before or multiple Wizards before. And imagine seeing like Kano and Icelander in a limited battle against each other. Creates some really wacky stuff. Mm-hmm. It's a full 8-man cube, which I really appreciate. And also the power level of the cube feels higher than a regular Flesh and Blood booster pack limited format, because they're able to stuff more reds in the cube list, and your cards are generally stronger than you would expect. So it feels like a little bit like a high power draft. Very fun.
Yeah, they can also pull those power cards from other sets and bring them to the heroes. We've played a lot of Midwinter Cube, but we haven't played any of it recently since after Outsiders. But Azalea just got a ton of support in Outsiders. I'm sure that the people who run the Midwinter Cube, they've made adjustments because of that. And it's essentially, yeah, we get that like balancing effect, and we can like try to put that into like the limited format.
Clark, you glossed over it just a little bit, but I want to reiterate that I put together this cube based on the list that OK and Y published. It's kind of fun to share cube lists and build what other people have done. And I've been able to run this cube as a draft at my kitchen table a few times, and it's pretty fun.
This Midwinter Cube was my first experience with it. I think where we all grew really close together. I think the draft itself was a lot of fun. I myself had never played a game of Azalea prior to this event. So I was like, I'm just going to jam Azalea. I don't care what happens. And I ended up winning, actually, the first one I played at, just because I happened to get some really good pools. And then, I think the draft itself was really balanced, and it let me, you just have to nerf Lexi a little bit so that Azalea can shine. We're seeing that now in the in the meta around this season that Lexi just takes what Azalea does and just goes bonkers with it. So
yeah, even in our limited format, we kind of came to the conclusion that like Voltaire being in the cube really skewed things towards Lexi. Like if you can get a Voltaire in pack 1 and jam Lexi, it's very, very strong.
Yeah.
So we opted to take it out. That was a decision that like we made with our cube, right? We were like, love this cube, made a small adjustment. So like our version is a slight deviation away from the... Oh, we also made some budget options. Like we're not running a Final Spring Tunic in our list because I didn't own one at the time, you know, and I wasn't going to buy one just for the cube, but I could buy everything else.
Yeah, and that really spoke to me about how interesting cubes are as a concept. It makes me want to build a cube, to be quite honest, because of the potential of like, I mean, like what both of you have already glossed on, just bringing different heroes together that normally wouldn't play in this sort of power level or this setting is just really fun. And even with the deviations we made, it was still a fun cube.
So one flaw that Flesh and Blood has now when it comes to cubes, this is going to be really apparent as soon as you decide to build your first cube. You're excited, you make a spreadsheet, a blank spreadsheet to dump all these cards into, and you go to Fabrari.com and you card search, okay.
Or Fabric.
What cards do I want to put in my cube? There aren't that many cards in the game right now.
Yeah, we're a new game, and I think they're still sort of pushing outward, sort of expanding width-wise before they add a lot of depth.
Yeah, like if you want to have, say, Assassin in your cube, you are probably going to need to have like duplicate cards in your cube if you want to have an 8-man pod, right? You're probably going to need to have 2 or 3 copies of the reds that you want to play, and then like at least copies of the yellows just to fill packs. You need to have cards in your cube, and it's going to lead to you probably needing to run duplicates in order to do it, just because there's not enough cards that exist in the game for you to fill a list of 360 cards and have them all be unique. You have to be kind of prepared for that. And that includes like equipment and things. But to kind of get around that, remember that you are the boss of what gets put in the cube. One easy, cheap trick that you can do to get around the difference in the amount of card pool is you can have the draft be meant for fewer people. If there's not enough cards to fill a 360 cube, maybe I'll keep it to 180 and I'll make this a 4-man draft and try to come up with some really fun draft format that works better for 4 people than it would for 8. Or maybe like give certain cards out as a token. Like the Midwinter Cube gives out Null Rune Robe as a token because it's so important for you to have at least some Arcane Barrier against Kano and Icelander. And there's a lot of ways that you can fix whatever problem exists that you're coming into if you're creative about it. So I hope you're inspired to build cubes.
All right. With that, let's go ahead and move into our Arsenal zone.
Joel, what card are you shouting out today?
Okay. For the Arsenal zone, what I've picked today is Warrior's Valor. Easily my favorite card out of like a Welcome to Wraith draft. And okay, so imagine you're drafting, right? You spent all this time looking for Katsu cards, sweet Bravo cards, and good yellow cards for Rhinar. And you're like, oh shit, I realize I've been passing a lot of Warriors Valors. You're right, because I got them all. And that's why I'm going to fatigue your ass, because I have like 4 or 5 red Warriors Valors, and you're sending me 2, 3 cards every single time. Like, you're just going to lose. So pay attention to the Warrior cards like they come up, because I'm for sure hoarding all of them like a goblin. So just wanted to shout that one out, because that's what I started with in Kingslayer, my very first draft, and did a lot of drafting since then with that card. So yeah, super powerful card, and get good.
Woo! For my card shout out, I'm going to talk about the coolest, the absolute best, the epitome of good card design in Flesh and Blood. That's right, the legendary equipment, Shock Charmers. Wow. What do you mean Shock Charmers isn't in your deck? What do you mean Shock Charmers isn't in any deck? It's a great card. Just look at it. You get to add an extra on hit for 2 damage, but it's a lightning card, so it can only be run on Lexi. And you need blues to make it work. And I mean, it's also good on Briar, and all of Briar's important on hits. Briar has a bunch of on hits, right? Yeah. No, it's great. You just need lots of blues to dump into it. You need to build an aggro deck around blues. That's all you need to do to make Shock Charmers work, guys. Come on. Why are we not getting on this? Get your copy of Shock Charmers today.
It also has Spell Void, which is super slept on.
Yeah.
Spell Void just screws with wizard players who aren't paying attention.
Yep.
I won with Everfold.
I literally played this card in my competitive deck. It's in my deck list.
Really?
Yep. It's that strong.
I need to run it against Kano, basically. If I don't, I die. All right, boys. As I've mentioned before, I went to a draft and did 2 drafts in one day for Road to Nationals. My first deck I thought was bad, but I went 2-1, and my second deck I thought was good, and I went 1-2. It was a weird day. But looking back, I should have known. Because my first deck, while it had a lot of generics and not very many class cards, it did have 4 copies in different colors of an attack reaction called Short and Sharp. Short and Sharp is, I think, pretty good. It's a way for you to get surprise damage in and can suddenly win you games. It is a assassin ninja attack reaction. You could play this in a variety of decks. You either give target dagger attack +3 or target attack action card with 2 or less base power gains +3. You know, like Spring Load or your weird yellows or blues. This card can be a bunch of surprise damage, and I won a game by playing 2 of them in the same turn. They had enough to block the first short and sharp, but not the second. And so I would like to honor Short and Sharp by giving both of you a signed copy today.
Whoa, no way. You're going to sign and give us a card? That's never happened before.
Wow,
We just take it out of the sleeve.
You know, Short and Sharp sounds like it'd be really good on Benji. Because
It is.
the weapon or the attacks would be unblockable. And
Hell yeah.
easy 5 damage. Call it a day.
Even more with Spring Load.
What's Spring Load?
Spring Load, I think, gets extra damage if you meet a certain condition, like if it's at the end of your chain or if it's played from Arsenal or something.
Here you go,
sure.
boys.
Wow, thanks, Fuzz.
Short and Sharp for you. Short and Sharp for you.
Thank you so much, Fuzzy. Oh, I got a red one. What do you get?
I got a red one. Wow, you're like hoping to one up me. You fuck.
I was pulling for it.
No, I like to keep things consistent here. I always hate pulling a yellow promo at armories.
Yeah.
Somehow every time it's always like shitty yellow or blue promos. I just want red promos, man.
Pitch It To Me podcast is hosted by Fuzzy Delp, Clark Moore, and Joel Recinos. Our executive producer is Talon Stradley. Logistics coordinator, John Farkas. Music by Dillon Hulse. Logo by Han V. And sound mixing by Christopher Moore. Last but not least, we'd like to thank you, the listener. Thank you for tuning in. Please give us a follow on your favorite social media platform at Pitch It To Me Podcast. Stay tuned for some outtakes.
Run by, you guessed it, 3 dudes. But don't worry, we're not all white and we're not all straight. Today's episode will be about limited in Flesh and Blood.
All right. I'm so sorry. I felt like we wanted to do more popcorning.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I thought you finished the whole thing already.
We have a bad habit of zoning out if you're at the start of a paragraph and zoning back in when you're at the end of the paragraph.
Literally.
Present and potential future of Flesh and Blood design. Hosted by...
Joel! It's so funny. I'm so sorry. Go get Oh, God.
Okay, here we go.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
I'm not arguing with that.
Sounds like you are.
I'm just not ready for
I
it.
don't see you writing it down. That's what's worrying me.
Sounds like
It's on the record.
sounds like Fuzzy's backing out.
Oh no.
Like